Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday on the channel. You can ask gardening questions down below, down in the comment section, and that's what I pick from each week. I think I picked like 20 from this past week. There's always way more than that. You guys do a great job asking questions, asking them in new ways, asking relevant questions to whatever's going on at that time. So thanks again for participating in it. The Learn to Garden video series, the discount code that's down below for $50 off is good through the 4th. Happy Independence Day to everyone watching the video. You'll see this on the 2nd, and then a couple days later, and that discount code runs through the 4th if you're interested. I don't know, as you're watching this, the folks who have bought it will see my plant disease video that's going up. So I've got already shot it. I just don't know if I'll have it uploaded on that, a page created and uploaded on that series of videos yet. But it's about basically disease prevention in the garden, just best practices when you're gardening to hopefully prevent some disease issues from occurring. And so I'm going to jump right into the questions this week. And the first one is about Aster's yellow. I've gotten a lot of questions over the years about Aster's yellow, but I haven't really answered them. Because it's an incurable problem. It's one of those problems that that if you get it in certain things, there's about 300 species, mainly asters, that get Aster's yellows, but carrots are also vulnerable, tomatoes, and some other things as well. It's a disease that's spread by a leafhopper. So basically, the leafhoppers. I'm down on the Gulf right now. They spread across the country north during the summertime. And that's how, they migrate. And as they do, they can spread a disease they eat a lot of vegetation, as they go, and they can spread this disease from aster to aster or any of the vulnerable species that can get it. Again, like carrots and tomatoes and things outside the Asteraceae, which is the aster family. Okay, so lots of, unfortunately, what you're going to see, what's going to happen with this disease is you're going to see maybe chlorosis in the plant, where it looks weak or, yellow. The plant itself looks yellow. You might see then just stunted. You might see deformed or strange-shaped flowers on certain asters. Those are the problems that you're going to see. They need to be dug out and gotten rid of. I mean, this is an incurable thing, and the problem is if you allow one in your garden to continue to have the disease, anything that comes along, and basically the leafhopper is not intentionally spreading this about, but it's attached in its mouth parts. The disease is, it chews on one plant and then chews on another, and then there you go. You have it in the next one. If you end up with Aster's yellow, I would go through definitely a period of time where I'm planting things that are definitely resistant to it. Most of the plants easy for me to think this early in the morning, but most of the plants in the mint family are going to be resistant to it. So things like salvias again, and those are also good plants if you have rabbits and deer and a lot of those kinds of things too. But a lot of the fragrant foliage plants that are resistant to things chewing on it are also the things that are unlikely to end up with these problems. So, things like geraniums have, fragrant, pungent leaves on them. Nicotiana, that would be another example of that. And again, salvias, agastache, those kinds of things are going to be your friend in the garden. Things that this pest won't chew on and also seem to be resistant to it anyway. So if it happens to you, it's not the end of your gardening. It's just possibly the end of those things being grown in your garden, at least for some period of time. Other things I would think about, and this is in that disease prevention video that's up on the Learn to Garden, or will be up in the next couple of days, is about making sure you're weeding around the space. You don't want to get any cover to those leafhoppers being in your garden. You want to make sure that they don't feel comfortable being in your garden with, some sort of weedy space around your plants. Maybe, also making sure that you're cleaning up things you prune. A lot of people promote, chop and drop, where you just chop off plants and use that material as the mulch. And I do too, but I mostly do that around my shrubs. I don't really leave debris around my herbaceous perennials and my annual plants. If I'm going to allow something to break down in the beds, I typically will walk over to my big giant Loropetalum or the big giant Osmanthus, and I'll throw the stuff up under that, okay? So I'm not really leaving a lot of debris around these kind of tasty morsels, things that grow all summer long and always have that tasty, new growth on them. So keep that in mind. I don't do, again, I know this, the Chelsea chop, where people are just chopping things off and throwing them down on the ground. That's all fine, but if I'm watering during the summertime, I'm going to be more vulnerable to slugs, snails, leafhoppers, all those kinds of chewing insects, giving them a really comfortable place to hide in the garden. So I take that material and I throw it under a shrub someplace, and I use it as the mulch under those things, and then I use a more decorative mulch around my perennials and annuals in order just to keep kind of a clean space up under them. So somebody has a Loropetalum that's green. We're on second time mentioning Loropetalum already. So the purple foliage plants, they can end up, and I saw a line of them yesterday. I was at a shopping center down here in the Gulf, and it was a whole line of purple Loropetalum, and there were a couple that were green. They obviously were clones of the same of the a parent plant that stays purple, that was looking good in the nursery. It was looking good when they planted it in the ground. And then a couple of them go green. This can be from overwatering, it can be from underwatering, it can be from soil pH. So it's unlikely in a line like that the soil pH is going to change too much. But if you can have high alkaline soil, can cause them to be green. Too much sun, too much shade definitely will make the purple plants more greener. But really, I think it's probably just too much heat, and I think a couple of them were succumbing to it. Maybe the irrigation was hitting them a little bit differently. The two that were in that line that I saw yesterday. So a lot of times it can just be too much heat. So again, I always promote, making sure things are mulched, making sure things are evenly moist. Those kind of things, because a lot of times heat can have an issue. But it can be all of those things that I just listed, including over-fertilizing. Over-fertilizing can also green them up as well. So it can be a lot of different things, but I think if you're seeing it during the heat of the summertime, in all likelihood, literally that plant's too hot in the space it's in. Those are, and basically it can't, it's a defense mechanism, basically. It's turning green instead of purple as a defense. Likely they'll go back to more purple as the nighttime temperatures cool down in the fall. But if you're seeing it repeatedly, I might pop them out of the ground and move them somewhere else, and assuming that space right there, for whatever reason, it's just too hot. But again, that whole other list I gave could be a possibility as well. Let's see. Somebody wanted to know if they could shear their arborvitae, just, because they've got one that's a little wider. So I'm guessing that we're talking about like emerald arborvitae or something like that. So it's gotten a little wider than they want. They want to know if they can shear it. Yeah, you can shear them. Be careful. I would definitely not do this during the summertime on a conifer, because a lot of times the conifers will only have about 3-4 inches of actual green on the outside of them, and then the middle of the plant's kind of bare. So if you prune too much of that off during the summertime, you're going to get scalding, where the sun can now make it into the middle of that plant and potentially damage parts of the plant that aren't used to that direct sun. So I wouldn't do it during the summertime. I would do it during the late winter months. You can shear it some when the sun is not as intense. And I might do it a little bit at the time. So if I've got it wider than I wanted, I might take it down just a bit so I don't take all the foliage off, and then that'll allow a little bit of light penetration to get some new growth in the middle, and then narrow it down again the next time you do it. But I would do it during cooler months, not during the heat of the summer on a conifer like that. So somebody asked when they could move some spireas. They need to do some rearranging. If they haven't been in the ground long, you can move them whenever you want to move them. Spireas are very, very tough. If you were moving them during the summer, I would prune about 10 to 25% of the actual height of the plant out of it, slowing any new growth down, and then pop them out of the ground and move them. But you could do it kind of any time of the year. Obviously, when they're dormant, they don't have leaves, it's going to be the best time of the year, and you don't have to really prune them if you do it that time of the year. But if you were going to do it in the summer, and I certainly would, I just give them a haircut and pop them out of the ground. Again, I said in last week's video, think through these things. Don't come out in 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a 98-degree day and dig the plant up and move it. you know, during the most stressful time of day. You know, pick 8:30 in the evening, you know, when it's still light outside, but the sun's gone down, to move them. So they at least have one night before it's in the peak stress. So that's the way I would think about it. But spireas any time of year, best when they're dormant. So there you go. So somebody said a lot of the plants in my garden have catchy names. Is that something that I would use to pick plants? Not really, but lots of new plants have catchy names. That's that's kind of the thing. There's a lot of debate. I'm standing in these touch of gold hollies here. This is this Hugendorn holly down at Plant Development Services or Flowerwood Nursery in Loxley, Alabama, and you can see it's called Touch of Gold because it has a touch of gold on the outside of the plant. There's a lot of thought that goes into naming these plants, you know, because people, you know, same thing with like wines. If you go shop for wines, so many of them have clever names, you know, and they have clever, you know, you're in a line of, you know, 500 different wines at the grocery store. They want to put a label on it and a name on it that makes you purchase it. So it's the same thing with plants too. So that's why we're seeing more and more catchy names for plants and plant series as well. We're seeing plant series names and then plants within those series as well. And there's a lot, trust me, there's a lot of bouncing around plant names for a while before people land on the one that they think will help sell it. Weird that would matter, but it does. Let's see. So somebody's talking about implanting an incredible hydrangea and wanted to know if they should remove the blooms. I talked about that last week. I was standing in those hydrangea paniculatas over there. Or maybe I talked about it I put up a video, the July garden checklist video, but I broke it down into 10 things we're doing this summer. And that was one of the things on there about purchasing. If you purchase a plant in full flower in midsummer, you need to cut it back before you put it in the ground if it's in full flower, or enjoy the flowers in the container until they fade some and then plant it. So I'll leave that up to you. But for me, I'd probably enjoy the flowers for a week or two in the container. No reason not to. And then when they start to fade some, you can cut them off, put them in the ground. I think that's probably the best, most enjoyable strategy to do that. Let's see. Is it okay to cut off bald cypress knees that are coming up in their turf area? So they've got grass area, they've got a taxodium or bald cypress, and if you've ever seen them around swampy areas, along their roots, they'll get what are called knees, just little places that stay up above the water. It's almost a way for that root to breathe. They wanted to know if you can cut, they're coming up in their lawn area. Is it okay to be mowing them because it's hit, the mower's damaging? You can actually dig those knees out. You won't hurt the tree at all. To remove the knees on a taxodium, but it's really not that big of a deal. And so if you're hitting one with a lawnmower, you're not going to be hurting that tree at all. Probably going to be hurting your lawnmower though. So I would probably dig the ones out that are coming up in the turf area. It's an interesting phenomenon with taxodiums that they have these knees. We call them this wood material that pops up out of the ground. And again, it's just up above the water line typically because they like to grow along wet areas. It's interesting, but it can also be annoying in an ornamental landscape. Let's see. Somebody asked, will fig roots damage a foundation? I don't really like to answer these questions about, because I just have no idea how your foundation was built, how old your house is, how none of that, but all I can say when I answer these questions is figs root very aggressively. So, that's one experience I have in 30 some years of being in horticulture is that, I know the plants that were very difficult for me to dig out of the ground, figs are definitely one of them. And so I probably would not put a fig right up against my foundation. Although most modern, foundations are going to, roots aren't going to really have all that much impact on them in all likelihood, but I'm not going to plant a red maple or a fig, or a weeping willow or even a flowering cherry that close to my foundation because I know how aggressive the roots are on them. Shirts, the ACA shirts, I'll get a little closer here. Also make sure this lens isn't fogged up. Sometimes down here it is fogged up. So you guys have seen a foggy me for a little while. When I come down here to to South Alabama, the lens fogs up quite a bit. The ACA shirt, which is just the last 5 letters of the plant family names, like I just already said, Asteraceae in this video. That's ACA is the last 5 letters. These shirts continue to sell well. Thank you guys very much who have bought them. And if you go over to my website, HortTube.com, the Learn to Garden video series and the shirts are over there. So somebody asked about what do I do when I dig into an ant colony when I'm planting. I just stop planting, pull the plant over to the side. If you stick a shovel down into an ant colony and disturb it, they're likely going to move to some other place. And so that's what I've done before. At the old house, you know, if it's fire ants, they're going to get a different outcome. But if they're just, you know, some other ant that's not a fire ant, I'll typically, you stick the shovel down in the ground, you move it one time, you know, you pull back on it one time. A couple days later, they're gone. Typically, they don't like to be in places where people stick shovels into their lives. So that's what I do. Once you disturb it, I think they'll move along, and I just wait a couple days to plant. That doesn't always mean that they're going to move on. You can go back out there and do it again unless you just want to kill them. But you don't want to plant into an ant mound that just then continues to be there, because they create drainage in the soil. They don't want to sit in water, right? So they've created a situation where any water that falls just drains right through their home. They're going to do the same thing around your plant, is create a situation where the water just falls right through the soil, and it's going to be very difficult to water your plant with an ant mound around it like that. Somebody has old railroad ties. They want to know if they can plant in the cracks of them. Yeah, just everything but food. I mean, not knowing what those railroad ties were treated with originally, what creosote, what was in the chemicals or whatever was in those railroad ties. I grow any flowering thing or anything that you can fit into the cracks, ground covers, whatever. It'll help those things break down probably over time too, to have things growing in them. I would avoid growing food in it, so that you're not eating whatever's in there in that wood. So somebody has a Natchez crepe myrtle, and they were told to prune, or they read on Southern Living, who always spells crepe myrtle C-R-E-P-E. The National Arboretum spells it C-R-A-P-E. They've introduced most of them out into the world, but Southern Living always spells it C-R-E-P-E. I don't know why. I have no idea, and it's confused everyone. It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. As long as people know what you're saying, as long as people can understand one another, it doesn't matter how you pronounce the words, and it doesn't matter how you spell them. At the end of the day, language is about, did the person understand it, right? What I said to them. And I'm not the language police, but it has always been weird that they spell it C-R-E-P-E, because then, I put up a video with C-R-A-P-E, and, I get 5 comments down below. It's C-R-E-P, and that people aren't as friendly as I am about people, misdoing it. It's like, you idiot, it's C-R-E-P-E. And, you know what I mean? But it's, some point I should actually answer this as a question and explain why it is C-R-A-P-E, and it literally doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. But again, that's how they spell it, and it does lead to people just being mean-spirited. It allows for mean-spirited people to show themselves. That's what I should say. Okay, so they were told in Southern Living magazine to prune the pieces of the branches that are going back into the middle, so that in the future, there's 3-stem crepe myrtle doesn't have pieces competing with one another back through the middle, rubbing branches, preventing light from getting inside of it, maybe helping to prevent disease, allowing air movement through it, allowing the leaves to dry out. A lot of reasons we would prune limbs that are coming into the middle of a tree that are going to cross one another. And they wanted to know, they've got some that have come out since they did that during the summer. Should they cut them off? I just wait till winter when it's dormant and do it once a year. So you're just not having to fret about it. They're not going to grow enough in a season probably to cause any problem for the tree. But yes, in the winter time, that would be part of your overall evaluation of the tree, and prune them off at that time, or late winter. Okay, let's see. So somebody has their seedlings. They start their seedlings. They get everything to come up. They're fertilizing them. They've got good light on them. Basically, though, when they pull them out of the cell tray to go and plant them in the ground, they almost have no roots. Soil basically falls off. They're just not rooting down into the soil media. A couple things there. I mean, one is you could definitely be overwatering, and that would definitely cause them, you know, to not root out into that soil media. A lot of times, most of the time though, that would probably cause some damping off and some dead seedlings. So if you're not seeing dead seedlings, you're maybe not overwatering them. You could be over fertilizing them for sure, and that could hurt their ability to root out, you know, into the surrounding soil. I remember, keep in mind, I always talk about keeping things a little lean. I don't want to overwater something because I want it to kind of stress a bit, right? And I don't want to over fertilize something. I want to kind of stress it a bit. I want it to go in search of, you know, and that's rooting, right? Rooting out into the surrounding area is being in search of something else. The other thing is you can give them too much light. Most plant growth, and I've said this in the past, most plant growth occurs at night. And so if you put the lights on, you need about 8 hours of darkness on your seedlings. So I don't know how much, you know, maybe it said it in the question and I don't remember, but I wouldn't want more than 14, 15 hours of direct, intense light on them. They need to go to sleep at night, or they need that rest period at night. And that's when a lot of the growth occurs. So you could be using too much light as well. So again, a lot of times I'm answering these questions with 5 potential answers. That one, I think I gave 3 potential answers. Somebody asked if I fertilize hosta when I'm planting them. No, I just fertilize once a year. I fertilize the garden once a year in February, March with an organic fertilizer. And I don't even need to do much of that, honestly, at this point. I think I've gotten the whole engine with the mycorrhizal fungi and the beneficial bacteria and everything that I probably don't need to be fertilizing hardly at all on anything that's in the ground, other than some annuals or my vegetables. Other than that, I probably don't need to be fertilizing at all, but I only do it once a year regardless. And then they asked about using, do I use compost tea or do I use Miracle Grow? I definitely don't use Miracle Grow, and I don't use any synthetic fertilizers at all. Not knocking them, they're totally fine, but I don't use any synthetic fertilizers. I use all organic fertilizers, which compost tea would come under that, but I don't use compost tea. It takes a long time to, it takes a while to make, and you don't actually get everything out of the compost. You're actually better off just top dressing the ground with the compost and not turning it into compost tea. And there's actual science on this, and I get that there's 5,000, probably more videos on YouTube about all the benefits of compost tea. There are benefits to compost tea, but the compost itself is actually, you don't get everything in the tea from the compost, okay? You don't get all the benefits from the compost, so why not just put the compost as a top dress on the bed? It was always confusing to me, and then I did find actual science. Several universities have looked at this, and you're better off putting the compost down. It's not so significant that it matters at the end of the day. If you like to do compost tea, you like to do compost tea. It works great, I'm sure. But you don't actually get everything that is in the compost out of it, and it takes time. This is a time event, right, to do it, you know, whatever amount of time it's taking. So if you do it, you like it, no problem. I'm not bashing it, but I'm telling you there's actual science that says you're better off just putting the compost at the base of the plants, which is what, you know, which is what I do. And then I typically will use like plant tone or something like that on my hosta and everything else in March. So, but here you go. I got the compost tea police are coming for me now. Let's see. So somebody wants a grass-like plant for full sun that stays really small. So they're looking at things like I show on the channel, like carexes and things like that need some part shade. There's a lot of things like that, conocloa, you know, a lot of those things need part shade. Most of them do, actually. It's weird, but you could try, blue fescue would definitely be on the list. It's got to be well-drained. A well-drained full sun space, blue fescue is going to be your friend, and there's a lot of new, really good ones. That's an interesting one to me, is that there's really, really good. We've come a long way on blue fescues, and there's a lot of good named cultivars out there. So somebody asked if I've seen a decrease in bees this year. No, we've actually seen probably an increase in bees in our garden for whatever reason this year. And I mean, we have a lot of color for sure. I don't know if I had more overwintering this year. I have my honeybees out front, and I just don't count that in my bee count. you know, as I'm looking at bees, I'm looking for native bees and wasp, moths. The biggest thing I see less of is moths, you know, unfortunately, and I think we all do. I mean, if you go driving at night with your lights on, we can all tell that there's a decrease in the amount of moths there were from when, you know, 40 years ago when I was a kid, man. You would drive it, you drive in the evening back then, your whole front of your car was covered in, you know, dead moths. And now, you know, you see so very few. You know, I can, you know, look at the front of my vehicle right now, just sitting right here, and see almost no insects, you know, on the front of it. There's definitely a difference in some of those, but no, in our garden, I can't tell a difference this year. So I don't know what would be going on with that. Let's see. So somebody has a climbing hydrangea, and it's just not climbing yet. It's not very old. Climbing hydrangeas are slow to establish themselves, and typically, a lot of times we plant them at the bases of trees and things where they've actually got some competition from other plants as well. So don't fret. It'll take sometimes 3 years before a climbing hydrangea will really get going. Sometimes even longer than that to flower. And then they'll take off pretty quick, but it's not the fastest growing vine, just period. I mean, they're much faster growing vines than climbing hydrangeas. There's going to be some, but there's going to be definitely some ramp up that can take several years to get going. And somebody asked me, does Hort stand for horticulture in HortTube? Yes, that is the, it was supposed to be horticulture television. It's probably a silly name, but nobody's going to copy it. So there you go. That's something, right? Let's see. So somebody has, okay, they've got a blood good Japanese maple in a container up in zone 5B. Does it need to go in the ground? Yeah, definitely. Or you're going to have to protect that container during the winter time. You know, zone 5 would be tough in a container for a blood good maple. If outside in zone 5, this container itself may stay frozen for, you know, 60 straight days or something crazy like that at some point. You know, I wouldn't, you know, I don't know how cold you actually get or stay, but if that container stayed frozen for that amount of time, there'd be no, you know, very unlikely that blood good Japanese maple would survive that. So you either have to get the pot thawed out occasionally during the winter time or get it into the ground, and I think you'd be best off getting it into the ground. Somebody asked if there are, this is the last question for this week. Somebody asked about cold hardy camellias for zone 6. Yeah, there are zone 6 hardy camellias. Again, when we're stretching the boundaries of anything, I would definitely spring plant them. So, you know, if you're looking at cold hardy ones. The winter series is good, and there's one other series, and I won't think of it right this minute, that I'll pop on the screen right here. But there's a couple of series that were specifically selected in breeding for zone 6, and you know, definitely 6B, 6A, you know, depending on where you live. Probably you want to keep them out of the winter wind, which is, you know, leafy evergreen plants. That's one of the big things that gets them in the winter time. It's not always the temperature, but just the fact that the winter winds blowing across them, desiccating them, pulling moisture out of the leaves, because the leaves stay on these things, right? So that's why you see less and less leafy evergreens as you move north. A lot of times, again, it's not as much about temperature as it is just about the dry air pulling moisture out of the leaf. If the thing was smart enough to drop its leaves up there, you know, then it wouldn't have the issue. You know, it would probably likely survive the winter, but it's just drawing the moisture out of the leaf, and the ground is slightly frozen, and it can't get water back up into the top of it. So that's what goes on there. So thank you guys very much for participating on the Q&As. Ask gardening questions down below this video in the comments. That's where your questions go. And again, there's 3 days left on the $50 discount on Learn to Garden video series. That thing it's filling out pretty good. I've got some more. I'm going to do some more design videos on there, and many more things, probably at least another year. Somebody asked if you had to buy it every year. No, you buy it once, you own it forever, and I'm going to continue to put up new content on it for probably at least, I would think, through 2024 before I stop putting up material on it. And I'm trying to put things in a logical order where you can literally learn to garden, you know, beginning to end, from design, planning, and then, again, recently disease, insect problems, any problems you might see, and lots of other details as well. So thank you guys for following along with the channel, and I'll see you next Sunday.